Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 most reliable news sources. Number 10. The Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal is a well-known name that can often be very controversial. Like many organizations, it is often accused of bias, but the accusation of bias in this case tend to be in a right-leaning direction. Many would say that the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal are very conservative. However, while there is some truth to this, the Wall Street Journal's news is known for being quite accurate as far as newspapers go, and it is still a trusted source of news throughout the country. Some people on the left have a small amount of distrust for it, but overall it is a fairly trusted publication on both sides of the ideological spectrum. The Wall Street Journal has also proven itself as a news source that most people trust. On election day, many sites took down their paywall. However, the Wall Street Journal made the interesting decision to keep theirs up and see if they could increase their subscriptions. Their plan worked, and they actually did see quite a large subscription increase in the days following. Like others on this list, one should be careful to read between the lines when reading political reporting or opinion pieces, but when it comes to the basic news itself, they are a reliable source. Number 9. The New York Times. The New York Times hardly needs any introduction. They are perhaps the most well-known newspaper in the entire world and have been what many consider a source of journalistic integrity and standards for longer than most people can remember. When many people give examples of a reliable source, the New York Times is often the very first example cited. However, they would be higher on this list if not for the fact that, like any newspaper in the world, there will always be a certain level of bias. The New York Times can be relied upon to do their best to fact-check and tell the truth, but if you are reading up on politics in particular, it is undeniable that they lean slightly more towards the left. Most of the public still considers them trustworthy, and the bias is slight enough that it's likely natural bias born from life experience and not anything particularly intentional, but all political stories from any newspaper should be read carefully, understanding any possible biases involved in order to better read between the lines. That said, when the president-elect, now President of the United States, criticized the New York Times for their coverage of the election and accused them of bias, the public showed their disagreement with President Trump in that regard by voting with their wallets. Shortly after the election, the New York Times had an unprecedented surge in paid subscribers of over 40,000 people. This shows that in a time where we have a glut of fake news, people are turning to one of America's most trusted news sources to get their information. Number 8. BBC. When most people ask you for the most trustworthy or reliable news source, the BBC is probably the first one you hear about. Known around the world for accurate and reliable reporting, they are even judged well in their own country, where people tend to be most critical about the reliability and accuracy of their news. Of those polled in the UK, 62% believed the BBC to be accurate and reliable as news, and almost half of those people found them to be unbiased. For a news organization that often has to talk about politics, these are already fairly good numbers. The issue is with politics in general, and the truth is that apart from a service where all they do is literally report what politicians said and nothing else, something essentially no news network today does, there will always be some amount of bias when talking about politics. This means that with many news sources, the news itself being reported may be reliable, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take any commentary without a grain of salt or think critically about the way headlines or the story is being presented to you. Remember when watching news to read between the lines. If a story is political, there's a good chance that some amount of innate bias is involved. If you read the story with a particular bias in mind, it will be easier to get to the heart of the matter. Number 7. NPR. NPR stands for National Public Radio, and it is a non-profit that makes radio programming for hundreds of public radio stations around the United States. Over the years, like everything in radio, they have seen their membership decline. In many ways, they have struggled to keep their older audience and find a way to bring in new, younger listeners. While many people will always drive, and thus there will always be a captive audience for radio, much of NPR's programming is often seen as rather outdated, and they are often accused of having a liberal bias as well. The accusation of liberal bias is not too surprising, as the public service is often funded by those with a slightly more liberal leaning, but the station itself has never been known to greatly exaggerate or mislead people for political reasons. Like many news services, when they get into opinions in terms of politics, bias is going to present itself. In this case, the bias is going to lean more in a liberal direction. However, this does not mean the news you are being told is untrue or even meant to mislead. Something can still be true but still be told with an innate bias. bias. However, in their defense, NPR does have award-winning journalists, even some who have been killed in the line of duty, bravely reporting on facts in war zones like Iraq. And in a time when people are looking for more accurate, down-to-earth reporting with as little bias as humanly possible, NPR has been one of the news organizations to see a recent rise in viewership. Number 6. Snopes. It may seem strange to see Snopes in this video. They are not a news source exactly, but they are a watchdog who has, over the years, kept an eye on both news sources and on fake news sources. They take the time to dig into the nitty-gritty and find the truth behind urban legends or rumors of all kinds. Their work has been tireless and often unnoticed, but they have been going at it since the early days of the internet. At first, they dispelled hoaxes that would appear on email chains, but now they have evolved to taking down hoaxes that appear on social media. Whenever some fake news story is trying to get its legs, Snopes is doing everything they can to cut it off at the knees. They find every little detail and ascertain the real truth, if possible, never worrying about any specific agenda besides the truth itself. This dedication has not gone unnoticed. Facebook has been under fire for the glut of fake news during the last election cycle that appeared in people's feeds, and the powers that be at Facebook have decided to do something about it at last. They are going to start checking suspect stories with fact-checking groups, and if the story doesn't pass muster, it will be hidden from being seen in people's feeds. Snopes, the Associated Press, and a few other trusted fact-checkers are working with Facebook to vet stories to make sure that people are not reading lies when they scroll through their Facebook feed. This may sound like a silly issue, but among the millennial generation, an alarming number got most of their election news from Facebook. For this reason, it's very important, especially with how people can accidentally turn their own feed into an echo chamber, that fake news stories are weeded out and removed like the cancer that they are. Number 5. Reuters. Reuters is not a particularly well-known news agency when it comes to the public consciousness. In most polls involving trusted sources of news, it doesn't even really register. However, most people are still probably familiar with the name Reuters, and their presence online has increased greatly in recent years. Many people may even notice that, similar to the Associated Press, a lot of news stories actually credit Reuters. This is because the two are actually very similar services. While the Associated Press is more of a non-profit venture, both were originally telegraph wire news services. The idea being that a large network of contacts could quickly use the telegraph service to quickly wire news around the world, so everyone didn't need a reporter everywhere, as long as one or two telegraph agencies had most everything covered by a journalist or two. Reuters, in recent years, just like the Associated Press and the rest of the news services, has struggled with keeping their business performing as needed. This is why, in recent days, we have started to see them posting more stories on their own website instead of simply selling their stories to other news agencies. Unfortunately, they would be higher on this list, but using their own website to market news more directly to the consumer has started to allow opinion to seep into more of their news stories instead of simply wiring the facts from the ground to other news agencies. Number 4. The Economist. The Economist is a publication that has been around for more than 150 years, and despite having a fairly clear political stance in its editorials, has still always had a general air of trustworthiness about it. The Economist is known for having a stance that is quite liberal and calls for a more global economy, a stance that a fairly large chunk of people are not particularly on board with. However, while their editorials do have a clear political tone, they are still known for being clear with the actual facts, and in terms of reporting news, are not known for being inaccurate. Part of the fact that they are considered so reliable may be the fact that they have worked hard to keep their editorial style more anonymous than other newspapers, so it seems more like the newspaper itself is speaking instead of different personalities. In a bizarre way, this almost helps keep the opinion pieces from becoming a spectacle and overshadowing the basic news reporting, something that has likely helped them to remain above the fray when it comes to public trust. According to research by the Pew Research Center, The Economist is actually the most trusted source in America if you look at it across both ideological spectrums. Interestingly, the poll lists the second most trusted news source in America as the BBC, also a British news company. Number 3. PBS. PBS, which stands for Public Broadcasting Service, is known for being incredibly trustworthy as news and also for providing excellent programs that entertain children and help them learn. While some may get confused because some programming they see locally on PBS may be made locally and not by PBS itself, the actual organization has an amazing reputation when it comes to being unbiased. For years, they have had an independent research poll conducted that finds them at the top of trustworthiness and reliability in terms of news. While this should be taken with a grain of salt because the poll is carried out on behalf of PBS, you don't just have to take their word for it. Other polls commissioned by outside sources have looked at the trustworthiness of news organizations as well, and PBS comes across with the best net rating in terms of trust to distrust. Interestingly, among Republicans, Fox News is the most trusted source, but among Democrats, it is the least trusted source, making it perhaps the most controversial news source of all. By contrast, PBS is considered trustworthy by a large amount of respondents from both sides of the ideological spectrum. Number 2. C-SPAN. For those who aren't aware, C-SPAN is a public access channel that streams live on TV straight from the floor of the House and Senate of the United States. C-SPAN stands for Cable Satellite Public Affairs Network, and it was created long ago by the cable industry in order to give people a way to keep an eye on the primary source when it comes to the actions of their government. While many people think that the federal government is involved in running C-SPAN, this is really not the case. In certain situations, those in charge of proceedings can ask for the cameras to be shut off, but beyond that, they have no control over the running of the network and what can be shown and not shown. While it isn't exactly a news source, C-SPAN is about the most reliable primary source you can ask for when it comes to unbiased political news. If you have ever wondered if what you read in a news report was biased, slanted, or outright reported wrong or out of context, you can watch C-SPAN or clips from it and find out the truth for yourself. There is no better way to know exactly what a congressperson said than to watch them on TV and witness with your own eyes and ears exactly what they did and said. Number 1. The Associated Press. In many cases, the Associated Press basically is the news. They are the no commentary, no nonsense part of the news whose job it is to have tendrils all over the world at all times. It isn't really convenient for a local paper to have a reporter in Iraq covering the war, but they still want to be able to report the facts on the ground to the people reading their paper. They cannot just copy someone else's story, and they cannot afford to send someone to Iraq. Instead, they buy stories from the Associated Press. The Associated Press has journalists all over the world, and they sell breaking news to roughly 15,000 news outlets around the world. They have long been known for reliable and accurate reporting and are not known for having any particular agenda. They are a non-profit agency that works with other non-profit agencies at times in order to share news as efficiently as possible. And in an era where many news organizations seem to have forgotten that fact-checking was a thing, it is refreshing that they have a very strong commitment to such, and in a world where news organizations have increasingly become primarily entertainment, a commitment to remaining objective. Nearly every news organization across the spectrum uses stories from the AP because they find and report the actual news. So I really hope you found that video interesting and informative. If you did, please do hit that like button below. Don't forget to subscribe as well for brand new videos every day of the week. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one. And thank you for watching.